your one-stop shop for great wrestling. WrestleCopia.com, where you'll find an armload of great wrestling podcasts. Some are weekly, some are not. All of them are great. Ray Russell brings WrestleCopia to you, including his own show, The Wrestling Memory Grenade. There's Regional Wrestling, The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop, the Puro Wrestling Academy, Retro Wrestling Review with Gene Jackson, Dave Dynasty's Wrestling Nostalgia, Monday Warfare, Raw vs. Nitro, the Other Ship podcast, the Captain's Corner podcast, and much, much more. Great hosts, great shows. I guarantee you'll learn something every time you tune in to the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Where do you find all these shows? How about starting it this way? Just log on to WrestleCopia.com. There's nothing else like it anywhere.
Ian Douglas is back already? Good heavens. He's been on the show more than I have. And I've been on the show since the first one. Oh, I've taken a licking around here. I can't keep to stay on my feet for very long. I don't know what's wrong. I keep tripping, bashing myself all over the area here. There's a kitchenette I've ruined it. There's no soup for me anymore. And in any event, it's worth it because I get to hear all these great stories from Bob and Joe Puccio. And we're going to look at the past once again with a great new book by Ian Douglas on The Outdated Wrestling Hour. Now, you see, I just pulled something without even falling over. Coming to you from the Outdated Recording Studios, where anything can happen and usually does, it's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name's Bob Smith. You might remember me from the old days with PWI magazines like that. And our co-host is named Joe Puccio from GenerationXWire.com. Welcome back, Belial. Did I read that right?
You have read that right.
Huh?
Ever see the movie Basket Case from the I guess from the late 70s?
My horror movie fan brother loved Basket Case. That's right. That's the Basket Case.
The actual Basket Case, the deformed little creature was named Belial. Happens to be one of my favorite horror movies. One of the first horror movies I ever saw as a child.
Get out of here.
And
whoa, back up.
Oh,
back
yeah.
Up. Somebody let you as a kid watch Basket Case?
Well, I mean, I didn't see it when it first came out. I saw it on home video. So I'm talking about when I was growing up in the 80s, mid 80s, we got a VCR and I got into horror and I was watching all the different horror movies when I wasn't renting, Best of the WWF Volume 30 or whatever the heck it was. I was renting horror movies, and Basket Case was definitely one of the first ones. And I've always loved it. And the reason why I feel I give a little tribute in our studio here to him is I'm actually going to be very, very shortly doing an interview for Generation X Wire with the star of that movie who played Dwayne. He was basically the lead, basically Basket Case's brother, the normal brother. Right. Yeah, and I've been in contact with him, and we're going to be speaking and going to do a little feature on Generation X Wire. So, yeah.
Well, now I see why you put Belial in your recording studio name box here, except that he was better looking. Anyway, we'll get on with things now.
Oh.
We'll get on with things now at the Outdated Homestead. Our guest, once again, the Three Timers Club knows Ian Douglas. He is nothing if not prolific. He has a brand new book out, and it was earlier this year that he had another book out, but he's looking at African-American pro wrestling history, going way back to when, things really just started getting started. There's nobody better to do this kind of work. Another series of books where the unbelievable research, the time it must take. Ian is as prolific as they come, and you'd never know if you're in the book because it looks like he spent 7 years doing it. If you've never read an Ian Douglas book, or you've read his and Oliver Lee Bateman's work on the Ringer website, well, we're checking out both because these guys got it going on when it comes to pro wrestling.
That's great. That's great to hear that Ian's doing another book. I mean, he's done some really great work. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm just so impressed with the guy. Like I said, I still continue to look up to the writers who I feel that I couldn't touch the hem of the garments. I mean this. I mean, him and Brian Solomon and a few of the others out there, I really think that these guys are really putting out some of the best wrestling books you could ever hope to read. I mean, here I am in my 60s, and I'm learning things from decades gone by. I didn't think that was possible, but these guys are helping me accomplish that.
I think the crop of wrestling writers today and who've come out in the last, 10, 15, 20 years has been so strong. And it's not something that we really ever thought we'd see when we were growing up watching wrestling, right? Because it wasn't really something, it was kind of unheard of, books on wrestlers, or at the very least, even if they were usually kind of puff books, and, they weren't really very serious. They weren't really looking at the subject's life and going into detail and taking such care with the detail. So it's been really great. I feel like ever since Mick Foley's book was one of the first when it came out, because I think that one sort of set the bar of wrestlers are not just idiots, that wrestlers actually can be intelligent people and they can actually put together a sentence. And, his book was obviously one of the best. There might have been a couple before him that, sort of that I'm forgetting about, but I always feel like he's the one that sort of started this whole revolution.
The first one was Have a Nice Day, right? I believe that was the title.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
That sounds right.
I will say this, as someone who has known Mick, he's been on, he did a few words on our show last year. You read the book, you hear his voice. You read those words, and you can hear his voice saying those things. I mean, it's like for somebody who knows him, I just think that he really kind of bared his soul right from the word go, and really, the tales of him, his struggles to become a pro wrestler and being taken seriously once he was a pro wrestler. It's a phenomenal piece of work. And I'm glad you brought that one up, because you know what? I've been thinking about all my all-time favorite wrestling books, talking to Ian and stuff like that. Yeah, Mick's books are probably about as good as it gets.
They really are. They really are. I mean, I don't think Mick's come out with quite a few now. And I know that I haven't read them all. The last couple I never got a chance to read. Definitely the first one, and then the sequel, the one he did right after. And I think that's the way he sort of writes his books, where he like literally picks up where he leaves off in his career on the next one. But at least the first one or two were great. And yeah, I mean, and speaking about, getting back to Ian Douglas, he did the book that I really enjoyed. I'm forgetting now if it was this year, it might have been late last year, was the Steve Kern book. We both spoke to him. He did 2 of the book, and both of those I highly recommend. He also did the B. Brian Blair book. Brian is also Steve I've spoken with as well, but Brian's somebody who I've spoken with on several occasions in the past. So I mean, yeah, he's definitely got quite the resume there.
And he's got like 8, 9, 10 books now. It's really amazing. Yeah. And yeah, the Kern book, the second one, a guy like Steve Kern, with a career like he had, first out you find out how humble he actually is. Never in my conversation that I had with him, he never came off like, I'm a big star or anything like that. He just did the best he could and tried to do the right thing all the time, which is what more people ought to try to do, to be honest with you. But I'll tell you what, the second book was spectacular. First book was good too.
It was.
Second one really hammered it all home. I don't want to say best, better, great, all these things. Let's just say they're real good books everybody out there should read, because you'll learn something, you'll be entertained, and you'll be enlightened, which is something you don't think you're going to be when you pick up a wrestling book. Am I right?
You're true. Like I said before, you don't expect it. And I think people would be surprised, people that don't pick up a book, they would certainly be surprised at how good some of these books are. Of course, there are always going to be, there's good and bad in everything, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of wrestling books on the market that aren't as strong. The majority of the ones that I have had the pleasure of reading in 20 years have all been, for the most part, really good. You mentioned Keith Greenberg, right? A couple of seconds ago, Keith Greenberg, who's done so many. I know he has a few. He just had the WrestleMania 3 book. And don't forget, Keith Elliott Greenberg also did the Ric Flair book years ago. He wrote it with Ric Flair, that To Be the Man.
Fred Blassie biography or autobiography,
Blassie,
really written in Fred's voice. Listen, as somebody who remains as fascinated by Blassie as anybody on the planet, and how he got away with that ultra-violent shtick at the time when he did it in the 60s and 70s, I remain completely in awe of Freddie Blassie, the wrestler. Yeah, I know he
Right.
was a popular manager and did a lot of great work there too, but the wrestler Blassie, where there's a criminally lack of videotape of his glory years, like a lot of the older
Yeah.
guys. And there's the thing, I'll say this one more time. I know the WWE has tape of Blassie during his last run there in the 70s. They never show it. I wish they would just release it, get it out there. I know it's there because I see it in clips. Like when he went into their Hall of Fame, they did little clips from those TV matches. Show them, please. It's just,
Yeah.
why hide that stuff away? Oh, well, anyway, Ian is really filling a need here in terms of educating us really about African American professional wrestling stars, what they had to go through to even become professional wrestlers, and 1,000 other things. The books are so deep and so detailed I'll get on with that with Ian in a little bit, but I'm glad you brought up Mick's book. That's a personal favorite of mine too. I used to ride around with Mick Foley in cars. What can I tell you? Back
Yeah.
in the day, wrestlers hitch rides. Young wrestlers hitch rides. I'll ride with him. You ride with them. Can you take this guy back to the hotel? I don't really want to take him back to the hotel. I want to go home. Those type of things. But that's what happens. You end up riding around with wrestlers in cars when you get into the wrestling business. Everybody kind of works with each other. Ask Joyce Postian in Minnesota. She used to ride Bobby Heenan and Nick Bockwinkel around. I mean, how cool is that?
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
she was just taking pictures at ringside. Was kind of part of the scene there, and certainly she got to know these guys and got to actually take them to the hotels and stuff like that. I think it's really great.
Talking about the books, I mean, there's so many. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head on others, some that maybe that we haven't spoken about. I always go back to Bret Hart's book, which is one of my all-time favorite. The one thing I'll say about his is that as good as it is and as detailed, I don't think you'll ever find a more detailed book about from a wrestler that a wrestler wrote himself about his own career. It's so incredibly detailed, match by match. The one thing that always stands out about his is the length. I mean, talk about a tome. This book, I don't remember offhand. I want to say it was about like 600 or maybe between 600 and 700 pages. I mean, this thing was so long. It was really daunting. I remember when I bought it, and it took me a while to get through, but I'm glad I did because that's one that I loved. The Dynamite Kid, Tom Billington, he had a really great book called Pure Dynamite that he wrote, I guess, sort of with a ghost writer. He wrote with somebody else.
That was proud
also
owner
really
of that
good.
book too.
I made it a point to get that simply because I'm such a huge Dynamite Kid fan. He's always been one of my all-time favorites. So yeah, that was good. The one just popped up in my head that I'm guessing you might not have heard of it. This was, I want to say it was about 20 years ago. It was called Sex Lies and Headlocks. And it was by Mike Mooneyhan, who's a wrestling journalist, and another gentleman that I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but it was two authors. And I remember the cover just really stood out. I think I was at a Barnes and Noble, and it was like Vince McMahon. It was talking about all the 80s scandals and things like that. And I remember I was just engrossed. I was enthralled with this thing for a couple of weeks. It was all about the WWF and the scandals and Vince McMahon's business practices. Some of them, not exactly on the up and up. That was a very interesting one. I'm not even sure if that's still in print, but that it's quite a title. So that one always stands out to me. Sex Lies and Headlocks.
He's so prolific, I can't imagine it being out of print, but who knows? You know what?
Yeah.
You hit me over the head with that one. I never heard of it. Somehow
Yeah,
I missed
I
that
didn't
one.
think so because you don't hear about
I missed that one. Yeah, totally missed it. But it's a great world of wrestling books out there. We have the wrestling magazines are still around. We still have, luckily, we have PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, with that great staff that they have now, and it's not all bad out there. PWI is better than pro wrestling right now, to be honest with you. I'd rather read a copy of PWI than watch SmackDown most times. The tone of that magazine's changed entirely since I worked there, but I will say that it's better. It's better. It's serious-minded. In fact, they're totally serious-minded about presenting the entire wrestling world, not just here, but internationally and, the Indies as well. I mean, they had Mustafa Ali on the cover. We never would have done that in my day because we wouldn't have sold enough magazines. They don't care. They're putting people on the cover they think deserve to be on the cover. I applaud for that.
That's good. That's good to know. Yeah, I can't say it's been many years since I've really, picked up newsstand magazines or gotten them, but I do look at them whenever we go to our, it's not too close. When we go to Barnes and Noble, they have the big newsstand section, the big magazine section.
Yeah.
And they still have their little wrestling section there. I mean, obviously it's not like it
Well,
was.
what else? Wait a minute. Hold the phone. What else is in it other than PWI? Do they have? First of all, forgive me, Inside the Ropes. I know how great you are. Do they publish a print edition of that book?
Of what? PWI?
No, Inside the Ropes from England.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I can't tell you the names, but I was just about to say that there are a couple of magazines from England that they always have there. I don't remember offhand the titles, but I just know they're sort of like the extra sticker on them. And it says it's an import or something, and it says, from UK or from the United Kingdom. And the other thing that stands out about them is that they're always really expensive.
Yes.
Because not only are magazines in general expensive today, but these are going to be even more expensive because they're coming from another country. I mean, even PWI, I don't know how much, I'm not even sure how much a PWI is, but these magazines are easily $12, $14, and that's for one issue.
No, PWI is still around $7 or $8.95, I think.
No, not PWI. I mean
the British ones,
Europe.
because they're imported,
British ones, yeah.
And it's only going to get worse, if you know what I mean. I miss the days of going into a newsstand and seeing the 7, 8, 9, 10 different titles from all different companies, and
me too.
that was the jam back then, man. And me and my best friend Rick Stickles would go into Williams Lunch in Catskill, New York, and have lunch, and they would let us take the magazines off the rack and read them as we ate our cheeseburger, and and I loved we had a cashier that going. Actually, we bought a magazine. And she goes, that Greg Valentine, he's just trying to hurt people. He's not a nice guy. I hate him. I go, do you watch? She goes, every Sunday morning. So it's like, those were the days, It's like, you don't know who's going to be a wrestling fan. But we put the magazine on the counter to pay for it. $1.75 back then or whatever it was, $1.25. Oh, that Greg Valentine, he just wants to hurt people.
No, I have the same memories. I mean, when growing up in Queens, New York, we had right outside, I would walk a block and there were 3 newsstands that were within like a couple of, maybe like a 30-second radius. It was crazy. 3 candy shops, like 3 stores that sold magazines inside. And I would make my rounds. I would go to all 3 and I'd see what they have. Sometimes one would get, one that another one didn't. And obviously at a certain point, I would know when the deliveries were. I feel like they were maybe like Tuesdays.
Yeah.
And on Tuesdays, I would show up after school right on my way home and I'd be there and just like, hey, I don't care. I used to love the WWF magazine. I mean, the glossy WWF magazine.
On a previous edition, you told me how much you love that book.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, it's funny. Talking to Brian R. Solomon recently, he said, it's crazy. He said, I'm working for the biggest wrestling magazine in the world because he told me that WWF magazine had a circulation of about 500,000 at one point. Peter Brock could dream of having a circulation like that.
Yeah.
And then he said, but at the same time, I was dreaming about working for PWI. Meanwhile, I'm sitting at PWI knowing that they'd sold the company, going, please, WWE, call me. Please. I didn't even know how to go about it. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't know how to go about doing it. So it's funny how perception has changed, even in the business in terms of what the magazines were, because I had a nice conversation. It was in one of our last shows of how their staff used to look at our stuff and kind of go, boy, we got to do something like that. And then who knew? You got to meet somebody who was there to know stuff like that. It's really cool. Now, here's the big question. Ian Douglas insists I should write a book. I don't think I have it in me. I cannot get over. First of all, it'd have to be about something else. I'd have to research something else. I would never do an autobiography. I don't think I'm that interesting, to be honest with you. I've had a weird life. I've been a professional magazine editor, professional blues singer, I've worked for two of the biggest companies about, with sports media. It's like, I just don't think it's that interesting. So I would need a subject to write about, not me. I think I'm decent on the show, but I think, if you do my life story, you go, "Ooh, he's just a schlub." I just can't get over that. I can't get over that feeling. So what am I going to write
Well,
about? The question is, maybe the memories and vivid memories of the type of wrestling you can't see anymore, right? Like I remember the NWF and maybe a book about the NWF if I could research that well enough, or
mhm,
about a long ago federation or wrestler or organization that just doesn't exist that maybe slips through the mind cracks, That would probably be the way
right.
I'd have to go with this. And we'll see. I'm starting to entertain the idea because I'll have some more time to do this type of thing, hopefully later this year. We'll see. I don't know. He's kinda tugging me by the sleeve going, "Hey, you should write a book." And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know."
I think it's just such an undertaking. The amount of time, the amount of hours to put into this, whether you can do it, I'm sure you could do it. I mean, I have no doubt that you'd be able to do it. It's just a matter of, yeah, I mean, what a commitment it is. We always talk about it. We write, you write for a few websites, and I have Generation XY where I do fairly lengthy articles, but nothing to the extent of a
Right,
book.
right.
And it's just a completely different it's a different line of thinking. It's a different way of writing. It's pretty daunting to think about. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's all about, the subject. I think if you have a good
Right.
subject to write about, because so much has been done already, so many things have been talked about, so many, it's everything has been done. So if you could really figure out something that is a niche enough where it's not really out there too much, but at the same time, it's something that will be interesting for people, that enough people would read it. I think that would be awesome.
But
Yeah,
that's one of the
absolutely.
reasons I like a book, Eric Johnson wrote, Run with the Bull, because his father and his grandfather were both pro wrestlers.
Yeah, yeah,
Neither of them were big stars, but it was still a wrestling life, So I'm like,
right.
yeah, that's something you could sink your teeth into. That type of slightly esoteric subject matter. Find something that nobody else is focusing on. Anybody would want to write a book about Macho Man Randy Savage or something like that. But to find something in the underbelly, something that people don't realize is bubbling under the surface of a subject matter, I think that would be kind of interesting. So yeah, I'll have to maybe I could write the biography of Pinky Larson or something.
There
Only
you
you would
go.
laugh at that. Thank you for laughing at that one. I appreciate it. I do appreciate that.
No, look, I
Kid, wrestling under a hood, it changes a man. Do you know that? I used to have to go from town to town concealing my identity. It's a tough life, but to be a champion, you have to be tough. Words spoken to me, my friend, by Pinky
there you
Larson.
go.
I'm not even kidding.
Yeah,
This is the first wrestler I ever met when I was a kid. I was like, "Oh man, this is
cool.
great." Because I know he was, yeah, I know he was shoveling it at me, and I loved every minute of it because he stayed in character. So I just, uh, I better self-publish that one. Anyway, Joe, it's always a pleasure. We're glad you're here to open up our show. Tell us a little bit about the great Generation XWire.com, the only website of its kind that I know of. Tell them why it's so unique. Tell them where they can find it. Tell us everything.
GenerationXWire.com. Little of everything about things that we grew up with, things that were big in the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s. It's not just wrestling, although we do a lot on wrestling, movies, music, books, art, really anything and everything. Classic movie reviews lately. We have a Gene Hackman retrospective going on where we have one of our writers, JC Correa, every couple of months. He looks at not a new, but on his end, he goes and rewatches an old Gene Hackman film and gives his review. Jaws retrospective recently, a Beach Boys retrospective on there. Scott Schwartz, who was the one of the kids in the old Christmas Story movie that everybody loves from the early '80s. It's pretty much it's very eclectic. I have some things coming up. I actually have a couple of things that I'm really in I don't want to say yet, but I have a wrestling guest that I'm really hoping to get. But again, it's just anything and everything. If maybe you're not too crazy about the last article that was out, you're not really into that, or the one right before that. Chances are you'll probably be into the one that was published right before that.
I will say that website, folks, is fun stuff you won't read anywhere else. It's totally original in its content. They're not following a trend. They're not following the news. They're digging up stuff about, like, they did an article about the What's Happening cast. I mean,
Yeah.
who thinks of this? Only you. You're like the Mel Brooks of informational websites.
Well, you know what? I think it's half the fun with doing stories like that, seeking out the individuals, and you bring up the What's Happening thing. Everybody remembers that the late 70s sitcom What's Happening. But I mean, I basically had to find the guy that played Raj, Ernest Johnson, and the guy that played Dwayne, Haywood Nelson, the little sister. Everybody remembers the little annoying sister D on the show. So I found her. And, little by little, I find mutual people, and I made some contacts, and, I'm able to reach out to them. And that's really cool to be able to speak to these people and just talk about the things, I'm from a fan's point of view. I mean, they know we're fans because we can talk about certain episodes and certain moments that we love. So I think these people from back then, they really appreciate that, because they know that you're being interviewed by a site that is actually seeking them out because they want to talk about the old days. That's half the fun for me, trying to talk to these individuals and talking about them. And hey, in some instances, I looked at as like a fanboy on some of these things, but hey, aren't we all? I mean, that's half the fun, So
there's the thing. This show, your website, we're here to have some fun, folks. That's why Joe's the perfect co-host. That he pays me to be here. So anyway, thank you. I just got him to laugh with a mouthful of drink. That's the best. Oh, I got you.
I'm glad I didn't spit it out. Yeah.
For Joe Puccio, my name's Bob Smith. Give us a couple of minutes, and we're going to talk once again for the third time. I got to get him a hat or something for this. Ian Douglas is our guest, and we're very privileged to have him, and we're privileged to have you listening. So give us a few seconds. We'll be right back. Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with the elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. Ian Douglas just told me he's excited. Now, the fact that a person this learned and this prolific says, I'm excited to be here, is the biggest compliment I could ever hope to have. I think you're in the third Timers Club now here. I think this is number 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would have him on once a month, and the way he was writing books lately, I may have to, because this is his second book of 2025, and it's just come out a few weeks ago as we record this. It's called, I love the title, by the way. A Decided Novelty, The Essential Guide to Black Pro Wrestling History from 1880 to 1950. It's a great old school cover talking about great old school athletes. It's long overdue. This is, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think the history of African American or Black American wrestling is way overdue. And Ian, congratulations again. It's another stellar effort. We have our friend Oliver Lee Bateman is your editor on this, and you have a foreword from Mike Johnson, the veteran wrestling writer. This is one of a kind stuff. And the previous book, it's a nice companion piece to that. And there's more to come, I'm getting the feeling.
Not along these lines. I'm going to pivot into something else, another area of interest. I did what I wanted to do with these last 2 books. I mean, if you count Bohemian Rhapsody, you could count those 3 as a trilogy of sorts with respect to Black pro wrestling, the Bahamas being debatably the first Black pro wrestling territory in the Western Hemisphere. But yeah, it's going to be those three, and then I'm going to move out onto some other things. It's funny you mentioned that my second book this year. I have Mike Rotunda's book ready to drop whenever he wants. So if he wanted to, I could drop number 3 tomorrow if he felt like it.
I am just thrilled that you are doing all this work. That's fantastic. And on top of it, obviously this stuff's going over, as they say in wrestling parlance. I think the last book was kind of an out of the box hit. This one is, I don't consider it a follow up though. This is more of a historical tome, as it were. Do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. It's a historical tome, and you mentioned the cover. You mentioned the cover, and you mentioned the title. So the cover is a composite of 2 different covers of the Green Book, of actual Green Books, the guide books that Black travelers in the United States used to use to find the inns and restaurants and other places that would accept them. So that's where the cover design comes from. And the title, A Decided Novelty, there was an editorial that was going through going around the Northeast in the very early 1900s, and the writer of the article said that a carnival between clever colored wrestlers, a carnival, and he meant that to mean a match, but a carnival between clever colored wrestlers would be a decided novelty. And so that's where the title comes from, with the idea being that due to the paucity of Black wrestlers, period, let alone Black wrestlers with in-ring skills, that it was practically impossible to find 2 Black wrestlers that you could pair with or against each other. And by the end of the book, I made the comment that in the 50 years since that statement was made, the pairing of Black wrestlers and the inclusion of Black wrestlers on in wrestling programs, it had gone from being a novelty to a necessity. So that was sort of how I bookended, for lack of a better word, the book. But that's where the name A Decided Novelty comes from.
You know, I get really fuzzy headed about wrestling history books a lot because, and not that I don't understand them, a lot of times when we're reading history in sequence, when it comes to wrestling, there's a lot of emphasis on looking at the stars and the championships and things like that without any mention of the changes in the way wrestling was promoted decade by decade, how things changed and changed and changed. Your book doesn't make that mistake, which I really appreciate about it. Um, you know what I'm saying? It's like wrestlers had to change with the times, just like, you know, the acceptance of Black wrestlers. And then all of a sudden, the Gorgeous George era comes along and everything changes. Wrestling promotion started to get flamboyant characters. The next thing you know, the advent of television, things like that, if this makes any sense.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's one of the things that I wanted to communicate throughout the book. And there's the episode in Oregon with Jumping Jack Claiborne, who, depending on the night, all of these matches, pretty much all of these matches in this era are best 2 out of 3 falls, with many of them going the full 3 falls. And he was throwing in it's really a glorified boxing ring, or in most cases in that era, it was an actual boxing ring that they were wrestling in. And on that stiff mat, he's throwing anywhere from usually 6 to 10 to 15 drop kicks a night and taking bumps from high up. And in the aftermath to one of his bouts in Portland, which I think was the first time they had a Black wrestler in a main event match, one of the sports writers was complaining about the fact that pro wrestling had morphed into more of an entertainment form than true athletic competition. And they bemoaned the fact that he was throwing 10 or so drop kicks a night and ruining the business. And this is in 1936, I believe. So, complaints that wrestlers from one era to the next, as things progress, are ruining the business. That's been going on for well over 100 years.
Yeah, but what is it about the drop kick that people thought was exposing anything? Did it look phony to some people back then? I'm trying to figure out what the mindset was because the drop kick basically is a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
It catches the opponent off guard. You don't think someone's going to jump at you from that height. So I'm trying to figure out why that was considered so, naughty at its time. I don't understand.
Well, I think it was more so the notion, and early on in the book, in just connecting the ideas. Early on in the book, you have Frank Crozier wrestling in the UK in the very early 1900s, and then you have Illa Vincent in he's in the Northeast by that point in the teens, and he's wrestling against Ben Roller, and the toe hold, Frank Gotch's famous toe hold, is a very controversial move. And I think I included a quote from a chief of police who is complaining that the toe hold is ruining the purity of the sport. But by the time you get to the 1930s, it seemed to be a case of the people who grew up watching wrestling in the teens, thinking about it as a pure grappling contest, not unlike what you might see freestyle, folk style, or Greco-Roman in the Olympic Games. They don't wrestle folk style in the Olympics. That's what we do in U.S. high schools and in the NCAAs. But that's what pure wrestling was to some people, and the drop kick was a clear departure from that, and that seems to be what they took exception to.
I laugh because considering what they do now, if you could imagine people being offended by the concept of a drop kick, it almost seems unbelievable because it's like. I was complaining on our last show. I was complaining that I was watching WWE recently, and they had a match on Saturday Night's Main Event with Solo Sikoa and Jimmy Uso, where they're on the ring apron, and I'm having a fit because I had it's coming back from a commercial break, mind you, right? They're already on the apron and they're battling it out, and I go, okay, let me rewind my DVR now. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I counted 1:20 they're battling on the ring apron. What should have been happening there? A referee should have been counting, getting them back into the ring.
Yep.
Nope. This young lady who was a referee was just standing in the ring with her arms kind of like this. And I'm like, what are they doing? So here I am all these years later, right? Offended over the fact that there's no rules enforcement whatsoever. So I think it may have been better in the old days because I could almost see what someone would consider something either too physical or too dangerous, or it just seems more logical back then.
Yeah, well, in the book, it was a surprise to me as I'm doing the research, but in the book, we get to Reginald Seekey getting counted out of the ring for the first time, and the reporter because the count out had just been introduced, and they're interviewing the fans at ringside, and the fans are complaining that the fact that there was a count out ruined the match.
We still hear that today.
Yeah.
Now, can I ask you a question about both this and your previous book? By the way, the previous book is called Gentleman Jack, and references the rise of Black American wrestling. Both available everywhere. My question is this. What has surprised you the most about doing all your research for these books? Has there been a factor that kind of took you aback and you said, I either can't believe what I've just found out, or has anything bothered you about doing the research and finding out what a lot of these athletes went through? Because I'm going through the books and it's like some of it was just so doggone unfair.
Oh, man. Where to begin? The entire Clarence Bolden experience. I couldn't believe that. the idea that a guy who was raised as black in Missouri, in the state of Missouri, travels to Cleveland, Ohio in 1900, leaves his black wife and the all black neighborhood that he lived in, and picks up this identity as the Cuban Wonder, ostensibly a Cuban wrestler, even though he very clearly was not, and becomes, in more or less the words of Frank Gotch, the best pound for pound wrestler of at least part of that era, and then proceeds to live the remainder of his life as a white man in Ohio. That whole episode was astonishing. As far as things that sort of stood out as like, wow, you don't see that anymore.
Mhm.
You have the use of the N word in British newspapers and the way it was used, that it's like the writer of whatever London publication it was just decides to casually drop an N-word to describe Frank Crozier because he got tired of saying Negro or black or colored or dark skinned, so he just decides to casually throw an N-word in there. Yeah, those sorts of things that you would never see. One of the biggest, as far as finally being able to trace the progression, and obviously with Rufus Jones and the last book, there was plenty of this, but now getting to study his contemporaries, Celie Samara, Jim Mitchell, and also Jack Claiborne, all three of whom adopted the headbutt and used it liberally, you can see its progression. So the progression of its usage. So I dubbed them Murderers Row, not based on the Yankees, but based on the group of black boxers from the era who were all middleweight, who should have been world middleweight championship contenders, but none of the white boxers would face them because they were too dangerous. So they essentially had to form their own fight club and fight each other over and over again. So I thought the name fit for these four in particular. I also dubbed them the Four Kings in comparison to Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, and Marvin Hagler of the late 70s and pretty much through the 1980s in boxing. I thought that was a solid title for them as well. But the fact that Rufus Jones is this prolific headbutter throughout the late 1930s, straight through the 1940s, and then Jim Mitchell, who is really the technician of the group, if there is one, he starts wrestling as an East Indian. He's touted as an East Indian wrestler in Maine, and he's wrestling underneath a hood, and he starts throwing. He starts to become very profusive with the headbutts, and then he takes the mask off and reveals that he's not East Indian, he's black. And then he just continues with the use of the headbutts and brings it out to California. So this is in 1947. And then Jack Claiborne, who had a few episodes like that in New York and in Ontario, but he goes to Hawaii, and suddenly he's throwing jumping headbutts with the same regularity that he was throwing flying drop kicks and doing the other moves in his arsenal, because he was more the acrobat of the quartet. And he's defending at the same time he's defending the Hawaiian championship, he's also defending his World Negro Heavyweight Championship against Celie Samara, the strongman, the powerhouse of the quartet in Honolulu, and throwing headbutts against him. And apparently Celie Samara liked what he saw, because Celie Samara leaves Hawaii heads off to New York and Canada, Ontario specifically, and he starts using headbutts with great regularity, and that becomes what he's known for, and that's in 1949. So you have this 3 to 4 year period. It had been Rufus Jones' thing, and all of a sudden the four most prominent black wrestlers of the era are all throwing headbutts, and it becomes this expectation of all black wrestlers going forward, and it's because of those four standard bearers. So that, I think, it was surprising, but it was also rewarding to be able to get it down, to get that history recorded, and so you can see where it sort of spreads like a virus throughout black wrestledom.
And I'm sure in later years there were millions of fans who thought Bobo Brazil was the one who started using it for the first time.
Yeah,
Because
and
you know what I'm saying? Because he got so popular that I think that, they always pointed to that. Oh, it's the cocoa butt or whatever.
yeah, and the cocoa butt is used the first time in New Brunswick. I think it's either in Northern Ontario or New Brunswick, where it's coined the first time, and it's coined for Rufus Jones and his headbutt. So in later interviews, when Bobo is saying, well, I got the cocoa butt from Jim Mitchell, he advised me to use it, that might be true, but the name was not, the term cocoa butt did not originate with Bobo Brazil. It originated with Rufus Jones. And in fact, it was later used when Don Kindred visited the same territory. It was used to describe his headbutts as well, before it eventually found its way over to Bobo Brazil.
Mm-hmm. I'm part of a circle of writers, and I'm surround myself with somehow, Brian R. Solomon, yourself, and so many others. And I'll tell you what, all of them are of the opinion that, I don't think they've read the new book yet, but the last book, they're saying people are going to refer to this thing for a long time to come, because we wouldn't even know where to find this information. Digging as you did, how daunting was the task to go way back in time like you did and just start it really from the infancy of black professional wrestling? I can't even imagine how you got started on this.
Oh, it was daunting. But I think I mentioned to you before, when people start telling me, Ian, you're the best black pro wrestling author around. When they started saying that, I felt like that came with a certain amount of responsibility, that if I am that, then 10 years from now, what would I hold against me for not doing? Or if I wasn't me and I heard someone had that title, then what would my expectations of them be? Once it occurred to me that all of this stuff is missing, I just said, okay, then that's my task. That's my responsibility. I have to go get it. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. I'm going to figure out who the key people were. I'm going to figure out who the bit players were, because in some cases, like guys like Ed Geared, they serve as sort of valuable connective tissue here. But if the best I can get out of them is a 2,000 word summary, like Ray Richardson, then fine. If it's closer to 15 to 20,000 words, like Celie Samara, great. Then I'm going to try to get it all. And I appreciate you for recognizing that it was kind of daunting, because it was. But even in the midst of doing something like this, there is a way to take the easy way out. And the easy way out is you identify who are the 10 main guys. Great, I'm going to throw up 10 profiles, and here they are, and you can read through them one at a time. And I didn't want to take the easy way out. I think the way to do this properly is exactly how I do it. You lay everybody's career out chronologically, and then it's easier to follow who was the first one to do what and where. And again, you mentioned guys like Brian R. Solomon, and also you've got guys like Tim Hornbaker, you've got John Cosper, you've got people that I look up to in what Keith Elliott Greenberg, of course. You've got, and by the way, Tim Hornbaker and Keith Elliott Greenberg, I really appreciate them. They both reached out to me separately, unsolicited, and said that they were ordering this and they were really excited to get it, and that this was valuable information and it was long overdue that this was made available. And I appreciate that. But the reason I'm bringing up those guys' names now is because the people that you respect for doing something, they're usually the guys who are doing something difficult. Because if they weren't doing something difficult, they wouldn't inspire you to do something. The people that you look up to in general are usually the people who are doing very difficult and impressive things. So when I look at a guy like, I mean, with Cosper, it's easy to pull out because he's written so many things, but he'll do an autobiography with somebody, and then he'll do a biography, and then he'll do a territorial history like he did with Louisville, or he'll do the history of the matches in a specific building. And so I look at something like that and I'll say, okay, how can I become more like the guys I respect? Well, territorial history of the Bahamas. Like, nobody else is going to do that. I'm going to do it. Like, how can I do it in the best possible way? And, or if I want to read the book, what would I want to see? Well, I'm going to have to get all the clips. I'm going to have to interview 40 or so people, and I'm going to have to get the thorough story. So that's how I went about doing that. Biography of Jack Claiborne and Rufus Jones. I have to get all the information. These guys are peers and contemporaries, and they're also the top Black hero and top Black villain in my eyes of that era. And I want to see, just in part to challenge myself, I want to see if I can blend their stories together into a cohesive narrative. And then with this book, not only is it history, but I hadn't seen where any wrestling writer had done a sort of racial or ethnic history that recovered valuable historical data in wrestling simultaneously. And I wanted to, once I decided it was my responsibility to do it, I wanted to be the guy who did that impressive thing. So, that was the victory, like, regardless of sales. And it's nice it's nice that my peers, and it feels so weird to call them my peers because they're guys that I looked up to, where I always said, dang, I wish I could write like them. I wish I could write about wrestling like they do. And Greg Oliver too has reached out, and Dave Meltzer has always said such nice things about me, like that. And Steven Johnson messaged me about a different piece. It was about Johnny Cobb, who's also mentioned in the book. But that's just so wild when all the guys you looked up to 10, 15, 20, in some cases 30 years ago, start messaging you saying that they enjoy your work or they're looking forward to it. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, this is why my knees knocked the first time I contacted you and I contacted Brian R. Solomon. I am in awe of your skills. I mean this on a professional level, okay? Because it's like, back in my PWI days, I churned out so much copy. It was almost like, I always tell the story about bringing somebody into a Hudson News store and finding my name in 22 different national magazines, not just wrestling. I used to be a prolific magazine writer back in the day. But that's hack. That's being a hack. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, there is always going to be a place for quick, clean copy, punchy headlines, and great captions. People need that too. But you guys are so good at what you do that I remember it took me the better part of a year to contact Brian Solomon. I was like, hey, he's never going to want to come. I'm just an old PWI guy. And he knew who I was. I didn't know that, and jumped at the chance. And now we've become legit friends. We've hung out together a couple of times. So things are really nice in that regard. But I want to get back to you in compiling the book, a shocking number of great photos in both books. Did the words public domain help out in any regard, or was it daunting to find photos as well as, and these are better than just breaking up copy, these photos. These are real looks at some rare athletes that nobody's ever seen before in many cases.
Yes. Yes, public domain helped quite a bit. Notre Dame has quite a collection of public domain photos of professional wrestlers that I was able to take full advantage of. And they were very valuable, especially in cases like Tiger Jack Nelson. And he just happened to take a promo photo that has a very, very stunningly clear image of his colored world heavyweight championship belt. And as we get into in the book, he was the first guy to really introduce his own personal belt as a black world champion. And he came up with a very ridiculous story as to how he won it. But yeah, I was thrilled to see that there's a crystal clear image of that championship belt in existence. It was awesome to see.
Every time you discover something, your head must have went zing, because it's like you're looking for things and not knowing if you're going to find them. Am I right about that?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Well, just especially images of some of these guys, like Professor Billy Clark is a name that gets mentioned early on in this. But for the fact that some artist did a drawing of him in a paper, I think it was in Iowa, there would be no image of him anywhere. But fortunately, I was able to include that in the book. And there's an image of Ray Richardson, guys who really only appeared a handful of times. But thankfully, someone, not realizing that I would come along well over 100 years later to do a book on all of this, they were kind enough to snap a photo and run it with the evening edition.
Imagine that 100 years later. This is why these books are so important, because you know what? There's a lot of wrestling history books, but they tend to be, and I'm not complaining about it. A lot of the wrestling history books tend to be, here's the history of this title, here's the history of this organization, here's what happened in this decade, la-di-da-di-da. There's nothing wrong with that. They all serve their purpose. You're looking at stuff that nobody's ever gotten their fingernails dirty and said, I'm going to find out everything I can about African-American wrestling in the United States. And I got to tip my cap. I don't even know how you started. Was the hard part just starting? That's got to be the hardest part, just cracking that door open and knowing where to look and who to contact and where to find the information, just getting it all down.
Well, it happened more organically than you'd think, because this was an area in which I had a particular interest. Because this may sound silly, but playing on an elementary school playground in the 1980s, and kids have no filter. I went to a very racially mixed elementary school. Southfield, Michigan in general was pretty racially mixed, at least up until the early to mid 90s. But if you were on the playground and people would say things like, if you get into a fight with a black kid on the playground, don't hit him in the head because it won't hurt him. I mean, it didn't mean anything at the time, and it's not like it hurts my feelings now, because it doesn't. And they're just acknowledging what they saw from a Junkyard Dog match at WrestleMania 3, which took place just a handful of miles away from where I grew up in Southfield. But yeah, these things have, I mean, they're stereotypes that you might think are confined to the world of wrestling, but they have real consequences. And I didn't grow up thinking that my head was particularly impervious to any sort of pain. So so you sort of wonder where these things came from, where the stereotype comes from. Yeah, so maybe I had a little bit more of just a general curiosity about these things outside of just the skin color, because some of the excrescence of some of this stuff, so to speak, filters itself down to me on an elementary school playground 50 years later, and you're wondering where it came from just from a personal standpoint. So there you go. I I think to do this, it to do this and do it properly, it takes somebody with a little bit more of a personal interest than viewing it from an outsider, or just wanting to, like, hey, Black History Month Black History Month is coming up. I'm gonna find a black wrestler and I'm gonna write about him. Okay, I've done my good deed. Um, which
Mhm.
which isn't to knock anyone who's done that. That stuff is valuable too. But and by the way, I've done it, and I'm embarrassed about some of the stuff that I wrote, but anyone who wrote anything about black wrestling up until this point, in a lot of respects, they were just guessing. They're guessing about anything, or about most of what happened prior to 1950. And one of the one of the comments on Twitter that I saw, it sort of proved the point, when somebody posted a photo of the cover of the book. It might have been Big E of it might have been Big E from
Mhm.
WWE,
Right.
who I think he posted or someone else posted, and then in the comment section, somebody somebody posted a photo of Bearcat Wright. And I'm thinking, why this is exactly why I wrote the book, because Bearcat Wright is barely mentioned in this at all, because Bearcat Wright was born in 1932. He was 18 years old in 1950. He wasn't even wrestling yet. And the sum total of what most people know about early black pro wrestling is they know the name Bobo Brazil. They might know the name Luther Lindsay. If they know the name Reginald Siki, they probably think of Reginald Sweet Daddy Siki, and that wasn't even his real name.
Right.
Uh, they got it from Reginald Siki Berry. That actually was his real name, at least the Reginald part. And they know Bearcat Wright. And sorry, Bearcat Wright uh, wasn't wrestling prior to the early 1950s. Bobo Brazil was barely wrestling. I think 1950 was his second year in the business. So that sort of underscores how much history was missing, that I could get 20 plus guys of significance into this book that for the most part folks had never heard of, and certainly not thought of.
God, Bobo wrestled till like 90, 91? Because I was with PWI and Bill Apter gets off the phone. I said, "Who are you speaking with?" He said, "Bobo Brazil." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, he's doing a match in Detroit." I said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "He doesn't wrestle anymore except when he needs cigar money." That was the quote. And every so often he would show every so often he would do a local show, and I'm like, remarkable. You know, just
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. I didn't even know he was working. And I remember he passed away during my period with PWI. I remember we did a special issue on that, and it was like, boy, we all had our memories of Bobo. Yeah, no, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but
Mhm.
Bobo was just so influential. Uh, Everybody still knows the name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every that name comes up so often, either on wrestling television programs or just in discussions among wrestling fans.
And I
Just
think it comes up a little too often.
Yeah,
which
probably you're right.
is
Yeah.
because it's the standby. And if you want to mention the name of an old influential black wrestler, the first guy they can think of is Bobo Brazil. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think the hearts of those people are in the right place, but it's just unfortunate that they didn't know that they don't have the careers of Jack Claiborne and the original Rufus Jones and Celie Samara and Clarence Bolden and Frank Crozier and Alex Kaffner and the original Reginald Siki, Don Kindred, Don Blackman, Buddy Jackson. They don't have the names of those guys on instant recall. And so let me grab a name. What's the earliest name I can remember? Bobo Brazil, or maybe they grab Bearcat Wright. And hopefully this will help. This will be sort of a first step toward correcting that. And what I'm also hoping is if someone wants to do a Bobo Brazil biography, because I'm not going to do it, I have other things I want to write about. If somebody wants to do a Bearcat Wright book or a Sweet Daddy Siki book or Luther Lindsay or whomever, that's great. I hope they will use a decided novelty as a reference guide to get the timeline sorted out of everything that preceded it. Like Mike Johnson said, Mike Johnson told me when he got done reading it, the very first time, he said, this book is like an expanded version of everything that would be in a Star Wars opening crawl leading into what everybody already knows or thinks they know about Black pro wrestling. This is the full backstory. So if anyone is interested in working on any of those sorts of projects, then they can read this book, and then they will know better than to make certain claims about accomplishments of Bobo Brazil and Bearcat Wright, and also pay proper tribute to the people that those wrestlers borrowed from, especially early in their careers. Bobo grew up in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and when you go through the book, you can start naming off the names. Jim Lee Umbles, Jim Mitchell, Gorilla Parker, Don Kindred, Jack Claiborne, Rufus Jones, Celie Samara, King Kong Clayton. They all wrestle in Benton Harbor, and there's no doubt that Bobo Brazil watched at least some of these guys perform in his youth before he started to get involved in wrestling.
But probably no doubt about that. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I don't know what to say at this point, other than this is it's a cut above. It has to be, because you're tackling a subject matter that maybe somebody wasn't. I don't know. You're the first person to say, "Shoot, I'm going to do this. I'm interested in this." And you're not doing it really to become, Mr. Joe wrestling writer. You're doing it because you thought it's part of history that's been covered up for far too long, and not covered up on purpose. It's covered up for lack of someone getting out there and saying, "I got to find out about this stuff. I got to go way back and find out about the history of Black American wrestling." And you're the first one to do it. I mean, you're kind of a trailblazer in that regard, but you knew that already.
I'll take it. There were times I thought of myself. You're going to laugh. I'm assuming you've seen the film. If you haven't, I apologize. But like Thanos picking up the Infinity Gauntlet at the end of Avengers 2 during the cutscene at the end, it opens. He grabs the Infinity Gauntlet, and the gauntlet. He just says, "Fine, I'll do it myself." That's how I felt. It was like, okay, fine. I can't count on anybody else to do it, so I'm going to do it myself. And that's how I felt.
There you go. You put a bug in my ear the last time you were on the show, or actually the first time you were on the show. You said Bobby ought to write a book, and I'm like, nah. You know what? I'm starting to get that itch.
Mm-hmm.
My problem is I don't want to write anything biographical because I'm about as interesting as a celery.
That's
I
not
I I,
true.
th- I think that I would need something to write about, perhaps a historical figure. Nobody's ever written a book on Baron Mikhail Cicluna, and I still love the guy. I would love to try to delve into how he got started and whatnot because his career was a lot longer than people. You know what I'm saying? It's like but you have lit a fire under my butt. I am doing some paid writing gigs now, and for the
Mm-hmm.
first time in a long time, mostly about wrestling. And I'm glad to be back doing it because I think I don't want to get rusty. You got to keep your chops up. So I'm just
Yeah.
thinking what to write about. So I want to thank you for putting that be in my bonnet because it feels good to be back typing on a typewriter again.
Well, if I could continue to encourage you, I would just say that if it becomes something that you could just put on the schedule every day and
Mhm.
say this 30 minutes here or this hour here, and you're an accomplished writer and you know what sort of a rate that and pace that you can start pumping out copy at, even if it's 500 words, even if it's just 500 words a day on the topic. If it's 1,000 words a day on the topic, great. I tend to think of Kenny Casanova got me in the habit of this, not because of anything he specifically encouraged me to do, but it was just watching him churn out 400-page autobiography after 400-page autobiography that kind of became a benchmark for thoroughness in my mind. That if you can get 400 pages on a topic, people will probably not feel like you cheated them. They won't feel like you cheated them on copy. So um, if you can churn out 1,000 words a day for 4 months, you've got a 400-page book on your hands,
Mhm. Yeah.
and you just got to grind away.
Here's a concept I think I'm coming up with a book about. Everybody's this is Keith Greenberg just did a great book about WrestleMania and the big events and this in your history books. I have a concept about writing about the B towns, the
Mhm.
smaller venues that had monthly shows regardless. Sunnyside Gardens in New York, the Washington Avenue Armory in Albany, places around the country that would run regular shows, and they weren't always star driven. You'd have one feature match, but like I always say, that format of wrestling lasted for at least 4 decades that I know
Mhm.
of,
Mhm.
probably from the 1950s at least until the 90s. And I don't know, I think it would be kinda interesting to look at the smaller venues, the smaller organizations. Is anybody I wanna find out more about Al Tomko, you know, because it's like I look at the show, my mouth hangs open, but he was on for a long time in Canada, a long
Yeah.
time. So, we're also star driven. I would like to know more about some of the bubbling under figures of pro wrestling, like a guy named Pinky Larson who used to set up rings for the WWF.
Mhm.
How long was he? And every third year you'd see him on TV wrestling, just once. Like he was the fill in type of wrestler. You know what I'm saying? Came
Yeah.
up to my belt buckle, had hair like Superstar Graham, and just was great at getting whooped. And it was like, how did all this happen? It all seems so surreal. How did the spaceman Frank Hickey ever make it? It's like I love the esoterica in that regard, and maybe there's a book in it. We'll see. But
Well, but
I
you're
just like
at
you say, I just have to sit down and just do it.
you're asking all of the right questions, though. If it is a topic that can sustain you so that it doesn't necessarily feel like work and you're grinding away at something that's going to make you miserable, that you're actually
Yeah,
getting some enjoyment out of it,
exactly.
then then I mean, you people call it a labor of love, but I mean, look, we're writers. We're practicing our writing skills. I've written no, I think of my writing assignments as just being one big pot. I'll write a 4,000 word feature, a 4,500 word feature thing for Splice today that'll pay me $35, and then I'll write a piece of SEO copy for a 1,600 word piece of SEO copy for a client the very next day that pays $500, and it doesn't matter. It's all practice and it's all stuff that I enjoy doing. And then, I mean, the bottom line is when you're writing something like a Decided Novelty or any of the other books I'm working on, I'm writing it for free in the moment that I'm writing it because I have no guarantee of what sales are going to be, and I'm releasing it independently, so nobody's dangling a big check over my head, and I'm not doing it for the money anyway. I'm doing it because I want to be the guy who wrote it, and I'm writing the book I want to read, and no one else was going to do it for me. So if what you just said, if that's the book you want to read and you can't count on anybody else to write it for you, then you got to do it, Bob.
Yeah, yeah. I want to hit on the, and not oddities, just stuff that perpetuated that you don't quite understand. I want to find out how it all worked, because it's like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
So, but I do love your business model. You're doing it on your own terms. Obviously, everything's working because what's your book count total now at this point?
Released 9.
See what I mean? I mean, you wouldn't have hit number 2 if there wasn't promise after number 1. So thanks for your stick-to-itiveness because we're all enjoying it. I mean, people rave about your work. I think these 2 are the most important that you've done, to be honest with you. The last one and a Decided Novelty, because these will be referred to by future historians. And that's a cool legacy to have, I think.
Well, it is. I hate to misuse another movie scene, but there's the scene in Troy where there's a scene in Troy where the kid goes up to Achilles and says, that's when he's about to fight that giant soldier, and he says, "That's a big man there. I wouldn't want to fight him." And Achilles says, "That's why no one will remember your name." Your name gets remembered if you take on the challenges that nobody else is willing to or no one else wants to. And so these last 2, if that's why people are going to remember me, then great. But even if they don't, I enjoyed the process of writing them.
It is the best thing. You're a family man. You're enjoying life. I think that's the biggest part of it, right? Just you're getting enjoyment and satisfaction from your work. And there's a lot of people who don't. So I think it's a blessing when you look at it that way.
Yeah, you find your own satisfaction. And the awesome thing about having writing as a hobby, as goofy as most people tend to think, I don't know if I should say most people, as goofy as many people think pro wrestling is. I have never, at least to my face in a job interview, or if I'm being vetted as a consultant writer, I've never had anybody say, "Oh, you've written, whether it was 6 books or 7 books or whatever the count was at the time. Oh, you've got all of these books published. Oh, but they're about wrestling. That doesn't count." I've never had it. I've never had it work to my detriment in a professional setting. It's always worked to my advantage. People are genuinely impressed if you've written like 1 book, let alone 9 or 10. And so, it's just another thing. I've written for Men's Health magazine. I write for The Ringer. I was the fitness editor at Mel magazine. And also I've written 10, released 9 books about pro wrestling. And people, when people are hiring freelance writers, they don't mind if that person also has a series of books, and they can put that under that writer's bio on their website.
That's right. And by the way, I just want to give another plug to The Ringer, the thinking person's wrestling section of a website. It is miles above, particularly now with the, how do I put this? The demise of an older wrestling news website, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to mention any names or words, but I think that elevates you guys to the top spot of the best place to find, literate wrestling pros and some, really good writing. I just very, very impressed. You and Oliver Bateman too. Oliver just has that knack. He's a hell of a writer. He edits
He's
your
the
books,
best.
but if you haven't read his stuff, he's really good.
He is the best writer I know, period, full stop, end of sentence. Oliver's the best writer I know. He really can write about anything.
Mhm.
And that, for a while, that Ringers Wrestling lineup with John Snowden, who might be the second best writer I know. He is the best MMA writer of all time, as far as I'm concerned. And Phil Schneider, who anyone who ever read the Death Valley Driver video review, he was, along with Dean Rasmussen, he was the key guy there. All four of us there simultaneously, that was a bit of a murderer's row in its own right to have us four there. Like if I dare put myself in their category, I was honored to share articles with those guys. I'm honored to have my name on the same screen as them. And Oliver is one of my very, very best friends. I chatted with him before I came on your show, and I'm sure I'm going to chat with him immediately after.
Well, I'm going to have to get him back on here too, because he was
Yes.
a great guest too. We had him on once, and he was very interesting and very entertaining. And I would love to get him back on here. And we don't even need a topic; just talk to me.
He's going to end up interviewing you if you bring him on, because Oliver is such a fan of writing and the process and the backstory, especially. I'm not going to call them old-timey magazines or publications because they're not that old, but yeah, he just loves that world. So you get him.
He turned it
back on.
around on me the first time. It was
Yeah,
like,
there you
this
go.
is Oliver Bateman, everybody. And by the third minute, he was like, "Bob, when did you blah blah blah?" And then I realized I was being interviewed.
Oh yeah, it's his
I
show.
think he's so good at what he does that that's his scene. That's how he excels. So. And I had to stop him and go, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
No. Anytime you have Oliver on a show, it becomes his within 10 minutes.
Sometimes I need that. Trust me, I do. Why do you think I hired a co-host? A little me goes a long way, and at least that's what my wife tells me. So,
Oh, that's wives tend to say things like that, mine included.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Ian, it's so good to see you, man. Congratulations once again. When your next book comes out in 3.5 days, we will have you back on the show, and we will go over that. No, seriously, this is as good as it gets. You're good at this stuff too. You should consider. No, you shouldn't. I was going to say you should consider doing your own podcast. I'm thinking, I know how hard I work on this. I know your time is limited and you've got a big family life and you got to devote time to that. Being that I'm older than the faces of the coins in my pocket,
Yeah.
I have the time to, really dig into it and do all the editing and all that stuff. But all I know is that you're one of the great wrestling writers of my lifetime already. And I really enjoy your work. I treasure your friendship, and this has been a stone gas, my friend.
Well, high praise that I can't live up to, but I will do my best with the next one. And also, as always, the check's in the mail.
Free lunch.
There you go.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will read the name of this book. It's a long name and it's a long book, but you're going to want to savor every paragraph. It's a decided novelty, The Essential Guide to Black Pro Wrestling History, 1880 to 1950, with the great team that put this together. Oliver Bateman, the editor. Your author right here is Ian Douglas, forward by Mike Johnson, the famous wrestling writer. And it's available on Amazon.com. I guess that's the best way to go about acquiring it. Am I right about that?
Absolutely.
Okay. You ever think of doing a book tour?
Nope.
No, you'd be really good on a book tour.
Look,
I'm thinking here. There's an old store called the Book Review in Huntington, which is here in Long Island, where I record this thing, and you would have been an awesome subject for to bring your book out and just simply talk about it. I frankly love that kind of thing. I love
Uh,
author tours. And you wouldn't do it? I think you'd
uh,
admit
I'll,
doing
I'll
that.
I'll tell you what, Bob, if the Thez and Tragos Hall of Fame ever decides to give a black guy the Melby Award, I'll be there. How about that?
All right, I can't top that. That's logical. I'll put it that way. Ladies and gentlemen, and once again, it's Ian Douglas. Ian, thank you so much, man.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Bob. Thank you so much.
How cool is Ian Douglas? I mean, really. I mean, he's like a history lesson every time he comes on the show. This is a book you're not going to want to miss. Makes a great companion piece to the last book. Go to Amazon, type in Ian Douglas. That's Douglas with 2 S's at the end. And see his complete library of wrestling books. And there's many more to come, I'm sure. Real credit to the business. Oliver Lee Bateman is another one of my favorite writers. You can both find them both at The Ringer, of course. We talked about that. I'm in awe of these guys. They are the real deal. And given the state of wrestling websites right now, I'm pushing The Ringer way up there because you will find serious content there, unlike most other places. It's all with a very journalistic bent, and I really get into that. Write to us, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Our website, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. All of our shows are there. We are available wherever podcasts can be heard. I mean, you name the app, we're there. We're even on YouTube if you choose to listen to your podcasts that way. I know a lot of older fellas like that. Also, we're still at WrestleCopia.com. You might want to check that website out to find out about all those great shows they have there, including ours. WrestleCopia.com. It's just that simple. Ray Russell doing a bang-up job. I don't know how he does it. It's amazing. He's so busy all the time. I think he's busier than I am, and I work myself to a nub. So he's got to really be clutching them pillows at night, because I'll tell you what, I really work these projects like nothing else. That and our sister podcast, the Outdated Entertainment Hour. We got some good ones coming up on that show, too. All right, I think that's it for now. I'm going to let you go. My name's Bob Smith from the old wrestling magazines day, WCW Mag with Colin Bowman and with London Publishing, who did it for a while. Of course, Pro Wrestling Illustrated and The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling and Ben Strong Wrestling and Sports Review Wrestling and Wrestling Superstars, and I'm going to fall asleep. I'm kidding. We did so many magazines. I can't remember them all. We did so many different magazines. It was crazy. We did a weekly newsletter, Pro Wrestling Illustrated Weekly. I'm getting tired just thinking about it. I don't think I could do it now. Way too old for that. I'm way too old for most things. So before I go collect my my candle and my long jammies, just want to thank you all for listening once again to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. As Ringo Starr says, all the doggone time, and it never gets old. Peace and love, brothers and sisters. Peace and love.